Добрий день, друзі, вітаю вас.
Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to Ukraine Media Center. I'm Olga Temanova, and I'll briefly inform you of the schedule of our press briefings for today. I'd like to remind you that at 1:30 p.m. here in our studio we'll have the mayor of Bucha, Anatoly Fedoruk, and we will speak with Anatoly about their work in the liberated city, and we'll also discuss the crimes committed by Russians against innocent civilians in Bucha. And right now in our studio we have a spokesperson of the State Border Service of Ukraine, Andriy Demchenko. Andriy, you're welcome. Could you please tell us what's going on the Ukrainian borders and what's the current situation? You're welcome. Hello, colleagues. About the State Border Service of Ukraine, its operations, and how our service people, jointly with other components of defense and security forces of Ukraine, are doing. You know, that's the border guards' fate, to be the first people there at the border to meet the enemy. When the Russian invasion happened, the border guards were the first people who felt it. It started with shelling of our units' locations, as well as border checkpoints where we have our duty shifts. Then there were convoys of vehicles, and of course, with this sort of mass-scale offensive operation, some of our border guards, some of our servicemen died. Eternal memory to them. Some of them were captured. Then border guards had to rearrange their units to regroup and join the ranks with armed forces of Ukraine. Now we are closely interacting with armed forces of Ukraine, commanded by the General Staff. As you know, recently the Russian occupiers, Russian invaders in some areas were forced to withdraw under pressure from the armed forces of Ukraine, and now border guards jointly with armed forces have been restoring control over the state border. I'd like to remind that in Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy oblasts, our service people already reached the respective locations of those border guard units. We raised the state flags in all those locations, and now our teams have been checking the border area because there is still a danger of mines, as well as danger of sabotage and reconnaissance groups, and we cannot submit our service people to, as well as servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine, to that risk, to that danger. So we continue our operations, our actions to get to the state border line in all its parts. Later, you know, there is still a danger, of course, and we see that certain units, certain teams are, certain units are still there across our border, across the Sumy Oblast, Chernihiv Oblast borderline, and there may be sabotage groups and shelling from the neighboring country. So, you know, we will not run the classical border control, so to say. We will arrange proper locations to have shelters for our guards and to enable them to control the border in all key areas. Also, in the east of Ukraine, in Kharkiv Oblast, as well as in south of Ukraine, our people, jointly with armed forces of Ukraine, National Guard and Territorial Defense, continue to fight the enemies, the occupiers, to run combat action. Almost every day, like other components of defense forces, our people are shelled. They see sabotage and reconnaissance groups sent by the enemy, but they bravely maintain their positions and they fight, they destroy the enemy's vehicles and equipment. Our UAV operators have been working in an active way. They adjust the fire of our artillery, of Ukraine's armed forces, and many times the artillery would hit the enemy's locations and equipment and vehicles, and we continue to defend Ukraine jointly with all its defenders. As an example of our border guard's resilience is well known to everybody, I think. Several days ago in Mariupol, in the city of Mariupol, where our border guards are also present and they are fighting the enemy there. So in the city of Mariupol, one of our officers covered the withdrawal of his group, and he was already surrounded, and he was by the enemy. He was wounded, and to prevent his radio from being captured by the enemy and to avoid being captured, he set explosion to himself. But his last words on the radio were, "Glory to Ukraine, eternal glory to heroes, eternal glory to all defenders of Ukraine, including border guards who continue to bravely fight for Ukraine." In addition to eastern and other parts of the border, our tasks include execution of documents and checking the citizens passing the border in the western part to European Union and to Moldova. I would also like to add that checkpoints at the border with the Russian Federation and the Republic of Belarus have been closed by the government decision, and there are no border checks carried out there. On the western border and border of Moldova, currently the situation in terms of the number of citizens trying to cross the border, those numbers have stabilized. On average, we have about 60 to 70,000 people a day in both directions crossing the border. For example, during the first weeks after Russian invasion, the human traffic in those directions was 120, 130,000 people in both directions, but most of them were citizens who were leaving Ukraine. Again, most of them are citizens of Ukraine, hiding from the war, and also certain numbers of foreign citizens. Also, now there has been a more stable situation in terms of waiting lines on the border. Currently, we don't see major waiting lines on the western border. There are some, say, peak hours when a certain number of people arrives at the same time, but that's about several dozens or maybe 100 cars, and people don't have to wait at the border for a long time. Again, if we speak about the first weeks after Russian invasion, there were waiting lines of about 4,000 vehicles at all checkpoints, and at the same time, there were also about 5,000 to 6,000 people who tried to cross the border on their foot to leave Ukraine at that time. That's basically all I wanted to share with you. If you have any questions, you're welcome to ask those. I'll answer them. Thank you. Andriy, could you please tell us, we all understand that potential situation on the border with Transnistria can become dangerous. Do you have any high alert mode there in your units? What is the current situation there? Well, like at the border with Moldova, at that part, at the border with Transnistria, as well as the border with Belarus, we have raised our security precautions to avoid any escalation in those directions. More to it now, we consider an opportunity of invasion from the Republic of Belarus, but at the same time, jointly with the armed forces of Ukraine and other components of the defense and security forces, we are ready to fight if anybody tries to invade, the enemy tries to invade from those directions, Transnistria or Belarus. Thank you. Dear journalists, you're welcome to ask your questions. Please speak into the microphone.
I have a couple questions regarding the Ukrainian citizens coming back to Ukraine. First of all, will be if you can provide the latest data on how many are coming back and how many are leaving. And the second one, more important, is if you can explain, I mean, like, how, if there is a pattern, which kind of people are coming back? Is it for family reunification? I mean, which are the main reasons, the pattern why these people are coming back? Thank you.
Дякую за запитання.
Thank you for your question. With regard to statistical data, since the 24th of February, at the border with the European Union and Moldova, there have been 4,300,000 people who crossed the border in both directions. 4.3 million people who left Ukraine, citizens of Ukraine who left Ukraine. There have been up to 3 million of those. Foreigners amounted to about 350,000. In the very first days, the numbers of Ukrainian citizens returning from abroad numbers were not significant, about 10,000 citizens a day, most of them being males. We do not ask people why. We do not ask citizens why they are coming home. But when talking to them, or when, say, some people from mass media talk to those males who were coming back to Ukraine, those said that they cannot stay aside with the situation we have in Ukraine. They just cannot remain abroad, and they're ready and willing to return. And they returned. They came back to Ukraine. Some of them would join Ukrainian armed forces. Some of them would get involved in volunteer support or other types of support for our country to win over the enemy. In the recent weeks, we see higher numbers of Ukrainians returning to Ukraine, coming to Ukraine. Now it's up to 25,000-30,000 people a day. Those are Ukrainian citizens, 25,000-30,000 a day. And unlike the first days, when most of them were males, now we see that also there are females, women, and children, and elder people. And again, we spoke with some of them, and they said that now they see that now the situation, especially in the western oblasts of Ukraine, has become safer, and they just cannot stay abroad, remain abroad. They are ready and willing to come back to Ukraine and stay in Ukraine. On the total, starting from the 24th of February, there has been more than 870,000 citizens of Ukraine who entered Ukraine. Any more questions? Microphone, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning. From Portuguese TV, I know the difference between a front line and the border. But I'd like to ask you about what is the situation between Mykolaiv and Kherson. If we can talk about the border, if we can know where really is the front line on this area. Thank you very much.
Дякую, але на це
Thank you, but for this question, only people from Ukrainian armed forces can evaluate the situation, because border guards are also under operative command of the General Staff of the Armed Forces, and only those people, those commanders, can provide this assessment. Thank you. Any more questions? Andriy, we see that indeed a lot of border guards have been together with armed forces and other units, other components of defense and security forces. Could you please tell us, have there already been any border guards decorated with some governmental awards? Do we already see such people? Because we understand that indeed there have been some heroic deeds, including what you just mentioned. It's really impressive. Yes, of course. For those things that border guards have done in defense of Ukraine, they have already been mentioned many times, decorated with state awards, by presidential decrees. Of course, there are servicemen who have been decorated, awarded postmortem, posthumous, and unfortunately, because this is war, and we lose our comrades in arms, and there are also some losses in the State Border Guard service, but we will be able to list all names after our victory. Thank you. Thank you, friends. Are there any more questions? Thank you, Andriy. Thank you for joining us. And I'd like to remind you that at 3:30 p.m. here in our studio we'll have the mayor of the city of Bucha, and we will talk with him about the crimes committed by Russians in the territory of the